to Joseph, but the tools would have been used for good in the hands of Joseph and Jesus. A hammer and nails in their hands would have fashioned plows and hoes for farmers, carts for traders, and all sorts of odds and ends for their neighbors. A hammer and nails in their hands would have been used to help people. But on that Friday at noon, the soldiers were using them for evil. Hammer and nails in the hands of the soldier were used for destruction as they crucified the Son of God between two robbers. The same implements, but used oh so differently. It is the same with all the gifts that God gives us. We have the freedom to choose how we will use them, for good or for evil. If we use them for good, we find ourselves using them creatively and sharing in the creativity of God. If we use them for evil, we are working against God, and that is when we destroy God's creation. Yet despite all of our thoughtlessness and even our deliberate destruction, God is always seeking to work for good in the world. So as agonizing and painful the sounds were on Good Friday, they are still seen as a means by which God continues to save God's people. God turned the evil to good effect. That is why we call it Good Friday and not Bad Friday. For all the bad that we do, God always works for good through us and our actions. In the silence, think of the sound of the hammer and nails. Let us try to be aware of the violence within ourselves, both the violence that does at times flare up and hurt those around us, as well as the violence we so often pretend isn't there or we try to hide. Think also of the way in which we can use God's gifts for good or evil. And then think of all the gifts and talents we are hiding and not using for God's glory.
Then the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. And so, because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. Listen to the sound of the stone that sealed the tomb. Listen as that rolling ball of rock runs heavily along the groove that had been cut out for it in the ground. Hear the hollow echo come back from the darkness of the tomb, and the dull thud as the stone bangs into place. All those sounds have a deathly finality about them. It was all over now. The great teacher and healer whose life and ministry had seemed to promise so much was dead. The man whose life had started in a borrowed stable had now come to an end in a borrowed grave. With the thud of that great stone, all the hopes of the disciples and of the faithful women followers were buried. Their 3-year pilgrimage with Jesus through Galilee in the north and then down to Jerusalem had all been for nothing. They could have no hope for the future. They will have gone home disconsolate, depressed, and dejected. You can picture them slowly turning away from the tomb with the same range of emotions experienced by mourners at a graveside nowadays. That mixture of reluctance, guilt, and that feeling that they were somehow being unfaithful and turning their back on their dead loved one. And that is where we leave the sounds of the Passion. Weeping men, weeping women, from whom the meaning of life had been snatched away. All the promise of the triumphal entry on Palm Sunday had evaporated since supper last night. They could only trust that God was still there, despite all the evidence to the contrary. And we, like those men and women, could do nothing except put our trust in God, even in our darkest moments. For ourselves, we can do nothing but wait in the darkness for the light of Easter to come.